Hello and welcome to In Search of Purpose with Sal Hanvey. Welcome to this week's podcast, In Search of Purpose. This week I have the pleasure to introduce to you Stuart Bailie. Stuart, how are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Sal.
What are you up to?
This is the morning, and my mornings don't tend to be too active. I take a long time to get my motor running, and then I'm fairly active during the day, and then I have this manic, not so much manic, but I get very intense energy towards midnight. And if I'm really working hard writing or something, there's another peak around 2 a.m.
Really?
I'm a kind of rock and roll person, so most of my life has been nocturnal. So the lockdown kind of suits me in a weird way. So I'm not as productive as I might be, but I'm not beating myself up over that either.
Exactly. Well, I found that my nocturnal days left when I was about 23. I moved in with a friend of mine for a while when I was living in Plymouth, and she had a baby. And I used to start cleaning the house at 1 a.m, in the house I was in beforehand when I lived in England at uni. And I moved in with her, and she was going to bed at 11 o'clock. And I thought, this is an alien concept. And I decided that, I'm going to stay up, I'm going to fight this, because that was my normal go-to, and play the guitar, but I couldn't do that because the baby was sleeping and it was a quiet house. Okay, well, I'll watch TV. Oh no, she didn't have a TV because she wasn't that sort of a person. Okay, what'll I do? I'll read. So if I read in bed, I fall asleep. So I was finding I was going to sleep a lot earlier. So I blame her for changing my nocturnal clock to the point where now I'm looking at the clock at 10:30 going, I think I could probably go to bed now. So hopefully it won't be too strenuous talking to you this morning then for you, because it's obviously quite early. Have you got your cup of coffee there?
I have a big cup of coffee, yeah.
Good stuff. So Stuart, thanks for coming on the podcast today. I just want to talk a bit about your really history to date and bringing us up to where we are now. And later on, we'll talk a wee bit about the magazine Dig With It that was actually released this week, which is fantastic. But before we do that, we'll just talk a wee bit about your journalism and broadcasting writing career and background. What really got you into this in the first place? What was the sort of first motivation for you?
I just think I like a lot of people, music really spoke to me when I was quite young and really excited me. And a lot of the time you're listening to songs, sang by adults who've got more knowledge than you. And sometimes you didn't understand what they were saying, and it would puzzle you, but you always had the feeling that there was this incredible world out there that you would be part of someday. And David Bowie would have been one of those ones where you go, what is all that about? And I was born in 61, so 72, 73, he's into his Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, pinups, and walking past the gramophone shop in Belfast and looking at those record covers. And going, this is mad. And slightly before that would have been T-Rex and Mark Bolan and Slade. And so I kind of came of age listening to glam rock and bands like Mott the Hoople and they all look like they'd come out of a kind of a cosmic dustbin, and they just looked fantastic. And I started reading the music papers then, probably about 73, 74. And again, couldn't understand, 3/4 of it. It was adults and dudes in London writing about their crazy lives. But you just felt this is really interesting, even that people can write about music and there's conversations going on and the photographs in the New Musical Express and Melody Maker and Sounds. And I went to school in the city centre, so you would be able to buy the music press off the newsstands in front of the city hall a day before anyone else got them, and reading them on the bus going home. And then I became part of Knight's record library on Botanic Avenue, and you could for 50p, I think it was, you got 2 albums a week, and so you could consume, and so I guess I by 74, 75, 13, 14 years age, I was a wee bit of a obsessive.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run coming out, and there was a huge hype about it, that finally the world is ready for Bruce Springsteen. And there used to be a thing called Britannia Music Club. I don't know if you remember that or not. It's probably before your time.
Some of the
Where I
things
think,
you're saying, I do remember some of these things. Yeah,
yeah,
night record
you
shop.
took out a subscription, whatever it was, £5 a month, and they sent you a list, and you bought an album. But the introductory package was that they gave you they sold you 4 albums cheap.
Mm.
So a lot of people took it and then regretted it later when they had to keep this annual subscription up. But my mate got Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. Gatefold sleeve, Bruce on the front, Clarence Clemons playing a saxophone on the back, and listening to it and reading the reviews of the music papers at around the same time, and realizing that this is what critics, and some of them were a bit snary about it.
Mm.
And then listening to it and going, this is great, and so all of that happening, and 75, you're a hop and a skip away from punk rock and the Sex Pistols, and all of a sudden reading this amazing stuff that's happening in New York and London, and by the time punk sort of happened in Belfast, I was I wasn't part of there was the elite of 40 people who were at the first couple of gigs or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But by late 77, 78, I was a fully paid up punk rocker with attitude, and that sort of that was me as an adolescent, being ready to take on the world. And that's the equipment that's kind of more or less kept me in good stead ever since.
And you're obviously not from London, you're from Northern Ireland, but did you live in London for a while then, Stuart?
Yeah, I grew up in East Belfast, top of Castray Road, and went to school here, went to Poly here. I was in a band called Acme, who weren't very good at all, and I'm not being cute when I say that. They were a bit poor, but it was brilliant being in bands, and it was brilliant going to the Harp Bar and the Pound, and hawking your gear in and setting up and playing 10 songs badly, 3 or 4 cover versions. And there was a period then when I sort of thought, oh, I can get a record deal there, blah blah blah. Mm. And I was never good enough. And
what did you play?
I played bass, and I did a bit of singing. Yeah, it was very easy to play bass as a punk, because as long as you played the root notes and had your guitar stripped down to your knees, and shook your hips a bit, that was enough, really. The Paul Simonon from the Clash would have been my model, and he was never a fantastically skilled bass player, but he always looked the part. And we put out a single later, like a local single, and it wasn't very good. And then I had this sort of moment of truth. I was on a local TV program, and I just thought, you're joking, mate. You have no chance. You have no charisma, no nothing. Your song isn't that good. But by that stage, I was just enjoying the kind of presenting bands to the world. So I would write the press releases, I would set up the photo sessions, I would get in touch with the local music papers, or the local music writers for the local newspapers, and I could and then when the guys were, sometimes you would sit in a pub and talk to a journalist, and they would interview you, and I would almost be watching him talking to us. Mm-hmm. So I kind of thought I had an English degree, which I did, and I enjoyed, but it was really just abiding my time until I got a record deal. and then I graduated and went, well, you haven't got a record deal, you're not really going to get one. So I went to London in 85. Mm-hmm. and literally like Dick Whittington, I had a typewriter under my arm instead of a parcel over my shoulder. And I kind of knew. I told everybody I was going for 2 weeks. I didn't want to make a big fuss out of it. Stayed with a friend called Johnny, and I was away for 11 years,
Wow.
and ended up. I was working as a postboy in a computer firm in the East End of London, which were very unsociable hours for me. You had to get up at 6 in the morning or whatever and get everybody's mail organized. But then I was going to gigs at night and I was sending in reviews. And at that stage, the music press, so there was New Musical Express, which was kind of cool, Melody Maker, which was sort of for musicians, Sounds, which was a bit more punky and bratty and was very good with punk. And then you had things like Record Mirror, which was just sort of more about the charts. You had smash hits. You had, and then you had the kind of industry music press. So there was probably about 7 weekly publications on music. At that stage, the NME was probably selling about 120, 130,000 copies a week. And they reckon that at least 4 people read each copy, at school and stuff. People would swap with their mate. So you were probably talking about 1 million people reading the music press in the UK and Ireland, every week. So this is before MTV. This is before the tabloids started to do music coverage, before the broadsheets started writing about music. So that was the place to be. The music industry had a ton of money. And they were throwing adverts into all the press, so everybody was financially viable. You had a big audience out there. There was a lot of great music happening, and I was just on the pig's back. I think it took me a wee while to get any response, and then I remember in those days, really, people wrote you letters back.
Yeah.
So you would post your reviews and say, "Here's some reviews. What do you think of them?" And then maybe 2 weeks later, somebody go, "It's not for us, thank you." Or most of the time, you never heard anything back. And then one day, I had 2 letters, and one day, one was from Record Mirror, which was a decent enough publication, and there was another thing called The Hit, which was very short-lived. And I had this dilemma: which offer do I take up? And I went with Record Mirror, who were relaunching because the Hit was sort of encroaching on their territory, and they became a bit cooler, and they were looking to publications like The Face, and so I arrived just as there was a sort of this urgency, and journalists were in short supply. You got paid, I think, about 40 quid for an album review or a live review, maybe 50 quid
for them, yeah.
And your rent at that stage in London was probably about 40, 50 quid a week. So if you got an album review in the paper a week, that you could more or less live, obviously, so it was a real scrounge lifestyle, but at the same extent, the record companies are inviting you to, Joe Blow's got a single launch at Ronnie Scott's, and you would go there and eat all the hors d'oeuvres, that were coming around on the trays, and have a few drinks.
Yeah, dinner.
So the music industry, you got fed and watered, and you had enough money to live. So it was very exciting. And like any kind of profession like that, you get a couple of reviews in, and then somewhere down the line you get a feature, and then you get a spread, and then you get a cover story. And then I at the end of my time at Record Mirror, which is a couple of years, I ended up being a reviews editor. So I would be the guy commissioning other people to do album reviews and live reviews, and
Brilliant.
so that was a desk job, and that was all right. And then I was approached by someone from a record label, Warner Brothers Records, really, which was one of the big ones at that stage. And they said, "Do you want to be a press officer?" And so it was like poacher and gamekeeper kind of thing. Are you going to hop to the other side? And what you do when you hop to the other side is you get a huge increase in your wages. Yep. So that was very tempting, and I did it. And at that stage, you would walk into the lift in Warner Brothers, which was in Soho and Broadwick Street, and they had all their chart placings in a little frame in the elevator, and it would have been Fleetwood Mac, Prince, Paul Simon,
Mm.
Madonna, so it was a huge thing. It was Warner's Elektra Atlantic, and I was sort of junior press officer, assistant press officer, and I think at one stage I was looking after 30 acts, and you can't look after 30 acts well. It was like a production line, but at one stage I was sort of working on Robert Plant's campaign. I worked with Motley Crue to try and set up a UK tour, all the publicity around it, and Nikki Sixx had a heroin overdose just before the tour, so we had to put out a press statement saying there's too much snow on the roofs of the venue, so that the tour was off. So you were being paid to tell lies as well. So it was interesting. Miriam Makeba, who's this beautiful diva from South Africa, I did some work with her, and Ted Nugent, the old rock and roller. So every day you would wake up and you were doing a different act, and it was interesting. And I got to know a lot of the journalists because I was sending them records and setting up interviews. And I didn't really like it. I got fed up with it. And at that stage, just as I was leaving Record Mirror, Fairy Tale of New York came out by the Pogues, and I'd been a big Pogues fan. There was a lot of sort of rootsy, messy, punky music around Camden in North London. I would have been part of that. And I was nearly in tears. I was going, I'm leaving Record Mirror. The Pogues have put out the greatest record you've ever had. And I should be there. I should be writing about it. And they sent this other guy along who was a bit of a public school boy. And the Pogues drank all his beer money and kind of threw him out of the room and said, clear off, you posh show, So I got a call from Record Mirror, says, like, I know you've left the paper, but can you go to New York and interview the Pogues? They're making a video for Fairy Tale in New York. And I was going, yeah, okay. And I went to New York, and they just finished a video, and I hung around with the Pogues in New York. They were playing a couple of gigs in Manhattan. And Philip Chevron, the guitar player, had been ill. So Joe Strummer from The Clash was deputizing. So I was kind of hanging around with the Pogues and a bit of The Clash. And the gig had people like Matt Dillon and the Beastie Boys and Jim Jarmusch, and and I just thought, I'm not going to work for a record label. I need to get back to this caper. So shortly after that, I kind of jumped ship and got work with the New Musical Express, which was my big love as a music paper, and they accommodated me. They gave me work, and I was album reviews editor, and then I got promoted to assistant editor. So I was sort of number 2 at the NME, which at that stage was probably the biggest music paper in Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was, and then at the NME put people on the cover. It literally would change a band's career. Or if you give a band a good album review, they would sell another 10,000-15,000 copies, and Radio 1 would play the record. And so you had this ridiculous amount of influence over music, which was great.
How long did you do that for, working for the likes of the magazines and writing and so on?
I think end of 85 I started at Record Mirror. 88 I was at NME, and I left London then in 96. So I was 8 years on the staff of NME. And that was Madchester. So it was, Happy Monday, Stone Roses. It was Trip Hop, Massive Attack and Tricky. It was Acid House. It was the Waterboys and the whole renaissance of Irish music. It was U2 going mad with Achtung Baby. It was Britpop, Blur versus Oasis. So it was almost every couple of months there was some new thing happened, and you were just right in the middle of it all. The editor was on holiday for 2 weeks when Kurt Cobain died. So I was in charge, and we literally had to put a paper together, scrap everything, put a paper together over the weekend, just to celebrate the fact that this fella had passed on. So, you know, on a weekly paper, everything just moves so quickly, and you're trying to respond to stuff, and you go to the printers on a Monday morning. So if anything happens over the weekend, you literally have to just drop everything and change it again. So really, really exciting. And then Tuesday, the magazine would get in to the office, the first few copies off the press. Everybody would come in. You know, there was probably a gang of about 40 people worked on the paper, a lot of them freelance, and everybody would read the paper. And then we'd go into a small room and shout and scream at each other for 2 hours and come out with the next week's issue. So it was really dynamic, intelligent people, artistic people. And a few years after I left, I said, "What, you know, what are the meetings like these days?" And the guy says, "Oh, we don't do meetings anymore." So I think I was there at a good time, you know. So
Yeah,
and every now and again, I find myself in a situation in a meeting of some sorts, and I'll sort of revert a little bit to the enemy, and I'll say what I think, and it kind of freaks people out, you know, to a degree, because it's like, you know, you should be a bit more diplomatic about this or polite about this, but you know, sometimes if you're in a creative moment, sometimes you should say what you feel.
Well, exactly. And I think as well, like how, you know, you were saying that you used to get the, you know, sort of hot off the press, and you'd sit on the bus on the way home and you would read things the day before that they were due to be out and so on. And, you know, that energy and that feeling of being able to do that, and how things have changed so massively. You know, you've obviously talked, I'm sure, about this many times, but just that instantaneous gratification that we all get from a digital age that allows us to have instant access to things, and you know, you don't wait anymore the same way. Everything's so readily available. And you know, you were talking earlier about that record shop in Botanic Avenue. I can remember that, not because I was from that generation, but because my dad would have went in there all the time, and I would have went in with him. And I don't know if you remember, but I take it you went there quite a lot, did you?
I would have gone to Knight's record shop because you could hire records, and you know, obviously you would get the tape recorder out at home and tape them, which was completely illegal, but that's what you did. And I still bought them. I became a good customer for the music industry. So yeah, so you would hang out there, and then later Terry Hooley's shop on Great Victoria Street, Good Vibrations, and you know, during the conflict, you didn't have much of a social life. And hanging around record shops on a Saturday was vital, really, to find out what was happening in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm diverting a wee bit there, but I wrote quite a lot about Radiohead when I was at NME. Radiohead and the Manic Street Preachers, the bands that I was sort of documenting as they were growing up, from baby bands, and I became quite friendly with both acts. And the enemy was the people. You would get the first interview, you would get the first photo session of the new album or the new single, and then you would maybe get a wee trip away with them, or you would be in an event with them. And you know, I hung around with Radiohead when they were launching OK Computer, and it was amazing. And I think the interview started in Oxford at Johnny Greenwood's house. And then it went to New York. They were doing the Tibetan Freedom concert, and then there was another bit. There was a bit in Belfast, so you're given this incredible access, but you were given the access because you could tell a good story.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, then Radiohead started just dealing directly with their fans on their Twitter or whatever it was those days, on their mailing lists. And at that stage, I went, "Oh my goodness! There isn't such a need for a broker anymore. You know, literally, artists can speak directly to their people, and to a degree, that's very exciting, very democratic. And you know, Radiohead put out that album in rainbows. You didn't even have a fixed price for it. You know, you could pay what you wanted." And that was sort of shortly after Napster, when people were downloading all their music.
Yeah,
And
Napster.
so the whole model changed. People didn't want to pay for music. People didn't want to buy a music paper to find out what the band would tell you directly. And to a degree, that was an exciting change. It was sort of democratic. And certainly a lot of uncool bands were going, great, we don't need permission from the music press to do what we want to do.
Mm.
But I think what's been lost along the way is critique. And every now and again, there would be, when I was working there, someone would walk in with a really good album review explaining why this band had made an important change, or lyrically what was astonishing about what they have been doing now, or so that's what I grieve for. Everything is fast now, but everything is thin, and everything is half considered, or quarter considered. So that and that that culture has more or less gone. There are websites and stuff like The Quietus and Drowned in Sound, and places who have tried to sort of address that and be more considered. But generally it is, and just a chorus of ridiculous fans going, "This is the best thing ever," and you're kind of going, "Come on, this is terrible." There's nobody going to tell you that this is terrible. So I am, I have become the old man shouting at clouds, like in the Simpsons cartoon, the things in my day, etc.,
Oh, I
etc.
know,
So,
but even the likes of that wee shop in Botanic, that feeling of going in and just, getting a record, taking it home, that feeling, that tactile relationship, and also like it's almost like a ritual. It's a real experience that you were having, the touch, the smell, the sight, whereas pressing an MP3 download just doesn't have the same ring to it, feel to it, and experience to it. And I can also remember in that wee shop there was a downstairs. Did you ever get to go downstairs into there was like, he had another archive of stuff that my dad used to get loads of stuff. It was an overflow. Did you know that?
yeah, and Dougie Knight was a good man. He was a sort
Yeah.
of an old jazzer. He would have been part of the sort of 60s culture in Belfast. And it was a good collection of music, and they sold kind of hi-fi equipment and stuff as well. But
Yeah.
the thing that I remember, they had a Super Sir gas
I
heater,
know, yes.
and that smell of the Super Sir gas heater is what I remember of Dookie Nights. And old albums, they start to smell a bit moldy.
Yeah.
So I remember you would take them home and you go, "Oh, it's that stink," and it was one of Dookie Nights records that had been in the basement for 10 years,
That's right, the basement. Yes, no
Yeah,
one else I've ever had a conversation with remembers the basement. Um,
yeah.
but I do, and the super Sarah and the hi-fi bits. But all those things, you see, they're the things that people talk about. I mean, I was growing up as a teenager in the 90s, so I was, going. There was still independent record stores in Belfast then,
Yeah.
albeit very few people went into them. It was sort of, they looked like they were in, about to just like close down any minute, which they then very soon after did. But I still really enjoyed that experience of going in. I'm one of those people that's old school before my time, and I also feel that I think over the last couple of years, has there not been, you could probably have a better insight to this than me, Stuart, that there's a more demand for records. Hasn't that sort of been a thing maybe in the last 5 years increase?
I think there's been a change. I think people, so much of our lives are virtual, and I think people crave for experiential stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's going to a gig, or whether that is going back to the idea of buying a beautiful piece of vinyl and going through the ritualistic thing of opening it and playing it, and the smell of fresh vinyl hitting you as you open it. And so I think some aspects of the pre-digital world are being valued again. And my youngest daughter Betsy is really into film photography,
Mm-hmm.
which again is a bit hipster. Um, and again, it's part of that. So part of that is posturing, and hey, I'm really into old-fashioned stuff, but also I think my daughter recognizes that there's a quality of analog culture, especially photography, that just doesn't look like digital culture, and it takes a longer time. You only get 36 frames on a roll of film if you're lucky. And you know, you have to develop it, and then you have to let the film dry, and then you have to either scan it or take it to a dark room, and there's another day. So it's not convenience culture, but there's something that you can pull out of that experience which is lovely and resonant, and has just got a wee bit more personal connection to, you know. So yeah, so I think that's, you know, it's interesting that I am a semi-conservative human being. You know, that I'm not a, you know, I had a website in 1998, and I've rolled along with various bits of modern culture and MP3s and all the rest of it. But you know, there's part of me, you know, I don't have. I don't do digital books. I wouldn't touch them. You know, I love books, and I am actually buying more books than ever at the minute. And for, you know, there's high end photography books that are bound in linen and beautifully printed, and you know, those things give me a deal of excitement. So. So I think there's a growing sense of alternative culture towards analog, and you don't necessarily want to go back all the time, but I think every now and again you can find the good in stuff like that. And you know, at the minute, you know, when you were at New Musical Express and you had to write a cover story, the cover story could be 5,000 words. It could be a bit longer than that. It could go on for 2 weeks, so it could be 8,000 words or 10,000 words. So, and you had a week to write it a lot of the time, you know, or sometimes you would do an interview and have to turn it around overnight. So you would literally transcribe the tape, write it, and not sleep. And then, you know, you didn't, certainly in those days, you didn't even have email. So you had to do everything on the paper and then go into the office and put a bunch of paper on someone's desk.
Oh, I know the things that you have to do. I know.
But, you know, so you know, I remember writing 4,000 words on Tom Waits, you know, and I was flying out to meet him in San Francisco, and he was hilarious, and he brought his wife along, and we had the crack, and I knew it was a good interview. I transcribed it. I probably spent a couple of days working on it, and you know, you were bringing themes in. You were thinking hard about the introduction. You were thinking hard about how to finish the story. You know, the guy who took the photographs, called Ed, he came in with the photographs, and you were almost writing it knowing that the reader would see those photographs. So it was a very sophisticated process in a way, and you know, so you know, what I'm in a very roundabout way is probably trying to say is that that's sort of what I'm trying to do again. I've done this ridiculously old-fashioned thing of starting a magazine with my daughter Betsy. So it is almost like we're old school, but we're very proud of it.
Very good. I like the look of it. I've seen it yesterday. I like the fact that we'll talk a bit about that actually. Like obviously. Dig With It magazine, which covers a load of different things, including music, art, and ideas, is what really you're going more. And the release date was this week, but the front cover, what struck me about the front cover was it wasn't frilly, fancy, full of loads of content, loads of information being bombarded, trying to grab attention. It literally was a person on the front with some small text, and I really like that.
It's a big photograph of Joshua Burnside, and we're trying to sort of celebrate photography and images, and again care. Yeah, I wouldn't claim that Betsy and myself are the best photographers in the world, but it's our magazine, so if we want to use our photos, we can. But again, it's probably looking back to the culture of my youth, where you would, a good image or a strong image or an image used boldly showed a bit of confidence. And again, in current, if you look at a lot of newspaper covers at the minute, there's maybe 20 stories on there, or 20 little teasers, because they don't have confidence, or they don't believe the reader will be interested. I think you've got, I remember someone said, yeah, was it a 15-second test? Someone would see a cover and they would decide whether to buy it or not. So a lot of time there are these whizzy spinning bow tie kind of tricks to try and make you want to buy things.
Yes.
And clickbait and, you know, all of those things that sort of you think there's a story, and by the time you work your way into the piece, that there's no story at all.
That's right.
It was an act of folly. You kind of go, well, we have to pay a printer, so we're out of pocket right away. How do you do this? You know, I you know, the one model to do it is to give away your publication and get advertising in to pay for the printing and pay for a bit for the people who put it together. And they end up being chucked into bins because they're lying around the street, or they're in the corner of a shop and gathering dust. And I didn't want to do that. So it was kind of, let's put it to the people, you know, and this was sort of pre-virus. So, you know, we started to work on this in January, February. And then that feeling of, oh my goodness, you know, we were going to sell this in the street. We were going to put on gigs and sell it to people and put it into the ticket price, or we were going to, you know, record shops and various other people were going to sell this on our behalf. And all of a sudden you go, well, you can't do that anymore. What do? Do you scrap all your plans, or do you continue with it? And we sort of went, well, we're going to do it. And if we sit on it too long, the stories will get old, and the whole thing will be worthless. So there's a time span there. So we thought we had to change a few bits because there was live reviews in it and stuff, and you're kind of going, you can't have a live review section because there's no gigs. So then we said, well, you know, we can do a Kickstarter, and we can ask, you know, and any kind of crowdfunding thing. I'm sure you've done some, Sal. You're throwing yourself at the mercy of your friends and your public.
I actually haven't, but I know the principle.
Oh my goodness! And it's kind of like when you have a house party and it's 8 o'clock and nobody's turned up, and you're kind of going, nobody's going to turn up. You know, I have no friends. You know, and that moment when you set up a crowdfund and we thought, well, we'll set the bar low. Well, you know, is 700 quid. Do you think we could get 700 quid? And then you know, Betsy made this wee video. The magazine was 95% done at this point, so we knew we had a fairly good thing. And then it was, right, you know, click, you know, go live, and Kickstarter went live. And I think in the first day we got our target. We exceeded our target, and then it grew and it grew, and the campaign ended last night at 9, and we got 300 and something % of what we were asking for.
Brilliant.
So we have enough to pay the printer, and partly that's good because obviously you don't want to be out of pocket, but also the affirmation of people supporting you, and you know, you can see the names on there. So sometimes it's your friends that have go, oh, you know, so and so's taken out, has bought this, but also strangers and people in different parts of the world.
And how can they get it? How can they get a copy of this? Stuart, tell us about that.
Well, Kickstarter's finished, so that's part one done, and then I think now you go to digwithit.com, and there's a music glue site, and that you can now buy it online. Hopefully in a month's time, you know, there will be shops open and stuff, record shops and stuff that it'll go into, but at the minute it's all kind of communicating through the internet. So God bless the internet. It's got its use.
It's got its use, exactly. And
so really exhilarating. And my daughter Betsy's second year graphic design student. So she's been hurled in at the deep end, and is writing and taking pictures. And we've got a few other guest writers, and the tone is probably close to what The Enemy would have been about. You know, copping a bit of an attitude, anti-establishment. Bands like Gender Chores and Problem Patterns are kind of female-fronted punk rock bands that are shouting and roaring about homophobia in Northern Ireland, and you know, igniting stories. I've got an interview with Dara McAnulty, the teenage naturalist, and his book is fantastic. And he took me for a walk around Castlewellan. And we've written a piece about Lyra McKee, about the awful loss that was the death of Lyra McKee, and trying to imagine what a great writer she would have grown into be. She was already a good writer, you know, and she would have continued on that journey. So it's not, we're trying not to do promotional puff. We're not trying to soft soap. We don't want to be all about, here's a band, here's another band, here's another indie band, because that's really boring. There's a big interview with Frank Ormsby, the poet, and he was my old school teacher, and he's now Ireland Professor of Poetry. Wow. And he would have been very tight with Seamus Heaney and Kieran Carson and, you know, all of the, you know, Michael Longley. And so we had a good conversation with him. So the idea is that it's not just about music, it's about the creative arts in Ireland, in the North. I think we don't always value it, and it is amazing.
It is. I love on the front cover, Nordy culture, isn't it? Nordy, I love that. That was great.
Yeah, the first time I heard that, there was a Howl Press Awards came to Belfast, and the Dubliners every now and again they would call you a Nordy. And I kind of hadn't heard that really before, and you're kind of going, should I be offended by that? And it's like, you know, a lot of them are going, I've never been up here before, and good to see all you Nordies or whatever, and you're kind of going, well, it's 2 hours on the train, you know, what's keeping you? But I think we're using the word to our own ends, and again, people are saying, well, why doesn't this magazine go all Ireland? And at the minute you would think, no, well, you know, you got to start with what you know. But it may change, or it may develop. Part of the crowdfunder was you could buy a year's subscription, so it's a quarterly magazine. Brilliant. So all of a sudden you go, well, we're now committed. We're now committed to putting out 4 issues.
Very true. And Dig With It, what does Dig With It actually represent? What was inspiring in the title there?
Well, it's the Seamus Heaney poem Digging, and he's out watching his father digging peat, and he has been gifted a kind of a academic life. And then at the end, I've got the squat pen and whatever. I'll dig with it. So it's the importance of the pen, you know, as an occupation really, and also dig is a sort of a jazz word. You know, do you dig? And I have a feeling that the jazz "do you dig" comes from the Irish, you know, digging to, do you understand or whatever. So to me, there's all sorts of layers of meaning there, and it's very snappy.
Yeah.
And you probably know yourself that names of songs or names of albums or names of projects, if it works right, it gives you strength. It gives you it puts a bit of wind under your wings. So to me, Dig With It feels right.
It's a really, really great name. And speaking of songs and how they represent, back in 2018, you brought out Trouble Songs.
Well, Trouble Songs was a book that I'd sort of carried in me for a long time. And it was my soundtrack to my teenage years was music, and a lot of it then, there was this other thing which people in England or maybe Dublin didn't even know, which was this sort of the conversations between popular music and the conflict. And you know, I lived in East Belfast. I didn't experience the very worst of the conflict, but I certainly saw plenty of it, and it impacted on every day of my life.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, you're listening to Paul Brady, you know, singing The Island, or you're listening to The Clash singing about letter bombs, and then all of a sudden Stiff Little Fingers arrive, and Terry Hooley's putting out Teenage Kicks, and all of those things are sort of wrapped up in you and how you see the world. the Pogues are singing about the Birmingham Six. Madness are singing about supergrasses. You know, somebody tells you Spandau Ballet have written a song about the conflict in Northern Ireland called Through the Barricades, and then you find out that it's about Kids O'Reilly from West Belfast who was shot in the back by a soldier, you know. And so I guess in the back of my mind, I'd been collecting these stories for a long time. And there was a point then where I thought, I have to write this book. And it was coming up to the anniversary of the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And it was also 50 years from the first kind of civil rights march in Derry that was broken up by the police. So there was anniversaries hovering, and I sort of footered around for a long time, and then British Council said, look, if you get this ready for May 2018, we're having a conference, so we'll buy some books off you. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I haven't footered around for years and cutting out bits from papers and filing them away, or sometimes just sticking them in envelopes and forgetting about them. I think I had to write, it was probably about 1,000 words, 2,000 words a day for 3 months.
Wow.
And that was tough. And there was 60 interviews, so there was a lot of material there. And it was a very bleak winter, 2017, 18, very cold. So every night I was in a different part of the conflict. You know, sometimes it was 1972 and sometimes it was 1981, and, you know, Christy Moore and the hunger strikes, or, you know, the Abercorn bombing. And so I put it all together. A publishing industry where couldn't really be bothered. There was a couple of slightly derogatory offers from Irish presses. And at that point I thought, well, most of my life, or most of the book, there's all these contrary characters, be it Terry Hooley or Billy McBurney, and these people who just did things. And I thought, well, I should do the book like that. So it was self-published. It was a bit frightening. East Side Arts came in and they said, well, we'll take some books, so we'll help with the cash flow. And then the next thing you know, there's 2,000 books in your living room or whatever. And you're going to go, what do we do next? But again, we did a Kickstarter and that worked well. And then everybody sort of, it connected with people. I did a lot of festivals and stuff. I did a lot of interviews. And I remember someone in a local publisher now saying, you know, you'll be lucky to sell 2,000. It's nobody cares. And so far we've sold 3,500. Brilliant. And most of those have been dispatched from my kitchen table. So financially it's worked out well as well, because, you know, there's no middle person that you're paying. So I think, you know, a lot of the time, a lot of the interesting stuff that I would tend to do would be doing it off your own bat.
Well, I think it's a great testament to you. It's very, very good. Yeah. It's very, very good.
And that's the legacy of punk rock, really. I think it is. You know, you don't have to wait till somebody permits you to do things. And, you know, I was involved for 10 years with the OEM Music Centre, and that was another. I wanted to
ask you about, because you were project manager there.
Yeah, well, I was one of the co-founders, and it started. It was a pub crawl really in Christmas 2005 with Gary Lightbody, and yeah, you know, like a lot of pub crawls and conversations that are lubricated, they don't necessarily go anywhere the next day. Yeah. And then through January 2006, Gary Lightbody's in touch going, well, what are you going to do about it? And you're kind of going, oh dear. You mean you want me to do something? Yeah. And at that stage, then we got a gang of people together, and there was a guy called David Match, there was a guy called Marty Neal, and it was okay. And then somebody says, have you checked out Billy McBurney's old warehouse on Gordon Street? And I was like, wow, look at this place, you know, and it's got a recording studio in it, and, you know, the shell of a recording studio. So we moved in, we didn't have rent, we didn't have, you know, we would borrow the keys off the estate agent. So we pretended that we were in the building, and, you know, so a lot of it was spoof and bluster, and the spoof and bluster got us in and got us a bit of funding. I left in 2016. So I was involved in the project for about 10 years, and it burnt me to a crisp. The stress was horrendous.
Yeah.
Charlotte Dryden's running it now, and she's doing a brilliant job. But you couldn't sustain that. I was just every day worrying about money and doing 12-hour days. And, at the end, there was 6 people on the staff. So there was HR problems and long conversations about plumbers and leaks and roofs that needed replacing. And it was just all consuming. So yeah, I'm glad I got involved, but a lot of those things, that kind of the personal cost is quite high. It really, and at that stage, I remember as I was leaving, I went to see a few people just going like, I'm really ill here, and I got a cortisol test, and I was riddled with cortisol like all day.
Adrenals.
Yeah. So, normally I think your cortisol peaks in the morning
That's
and
right.
then goes down, and my cortisol was just there all the time. And that's the kind of thing can kill you. I mean, you probably know
That's
more about
right.
it.
I do, because you're in a fight or flight, and you produce the most amount of cortisol specifically between 3 and 5 in the morning. And if you're producing the same amount 12 hours later, it means your circadian rhythm is out of whack, and your fight or flight in permanent switch on mode. So yeah, that's not good. So I brought that. I can remember before the outlet, because I used to go there all the time. My godfather worked there, and I spent a lot of time in the outlet centre, because my mum and dad had an album called Howl Press. The band is called Howl Press, and they were actually under Billy McBurney's Outlet record.
Wow.
So that was first thing. Second of all, with my dad being a DJ, on downtown, he used to go there all the time, and I used to go with him, and just walk around and look at all the records, and then later the CDs and all that. I spent a very, very, very long time there. And then remember when I got my driving test, they allowed me to park in the car park if I came to Belfast, and I felt really cool, because I got a car parking space in the outlet. And then when it changed over to and I hadn't seen it, the transition, and then going, and where the bands would play would obviously be where all the records would have been lined. I mean, I take it you saw them whenever it was the outlet centre, of course.
Yeah, we went down, and it was sort of like everybody just walked out. It was still as it was, and that whole area where the gigs are now is just industrial racking.
Yeah, I loved it.
And you go, what are we going to do with this? And there's a guy called Jimmy Symington who made the first stage using the industrial racking. So it was like a giant Meccano set. So he kind of got the spanners out and probably wouldn't have passed any health and safety rules. But it was just, let's just do this. And people would say to you, what's your feasibility study say? And we're going, maybe we don't have a feasibility study. We've got the authority of music and the authority of punk, so that was kind of what we did. But Billy came along. We did a kind of an open day on the 5th of May 2007, and Billy and the family came along. So there was, and he was he kind of worked out what we were doing at that point, and God bless him, I think his Alzheimer's had started then, but I think he was still pleased to think that the building continued to function as a centre for music and a centre for the music industry. So, that whole area now, when we moved into that area, it was very much a creative, bohemian, creative place. And now, and it sort of got turned into a kind of a place where people get drunk, and somebody sits in the corner and plays Brown Eyed Girl, on an acoustic guitar. So, gentrification and big money have sort of polluted Belfast, and we'll have to wait and see when we get beyond the kind of the lockdown to see whether this reprieve or this reset has given us any break from capitalism, or whether capitalism is just going to get its turbo charge on again and just flatten us all.
Exactly. And as well as that, you know, obviously you're not doing any Radio Ulster. You were a presenter in Radio Ulster for many, many years, and at least you're not having to do that remotely at the moment, which I suppose is a blessing. How long did you do that for, Stuart?
20 years I was on radio every week, and then I was summarily dismissed. My face didn't fit with certain people, so sadly that came to an end. And again, you know, you can dwell on that, you get angry or whatever, but you know, sometimes you just have to move on. You know, what do I do, or what makes my motor run? I think ultimately I serve music, and music sort of takes me where I need to go most of the time.
Yeah.
And I think if I do it for the money, much as money's very helpful,
yeah.
But if I do things for the money, it generally takes me down the wrong road.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do it because my mojo is kind of sending out the right signals, then I think that's the right road to go down. And with luck, the finances will look after themselves, or will come right in the end. You know, so with the magazine at the minute, I'm saying to my daughter, this isn't a license to get rich, but hopefully we won't lose money over the 4 issues, and other work or other bits of goodwill will come our way because we're showing good faith, and we're doing something that's a bit bold.
Well, it's lovely to do that with your daughter. You know, it's a lovely experience, and she's obviously really into the photography side of things. And the two is, I really wish you the best success with the magazine. And at the end of the day, you are there to serve music, as you say. And I think that that's extremely purposeful and is very fitting for my podcast, which is In Search of Purpose, which I really feel that you have found, which is to serve music. And you're doing a really great job in all the different aspects and genres that you've brought together over the years. Thank you so much for taking the time, Stuart, to come on the podcast today. I really, really appreciate it.
Okay, Sal, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.